Thank you very much. It's very nice to be among friends. And getting an applause is very nice. I enjoy it because I gave a lot of speeches in Washington and I never got any applause up there. So I'm glad to be here. Some people give me credit for energizing individuals in the cause of liberty. The truth is, meeting people like you who are interested in doing something about it, you give me a lot of encouragement. So I thank you for the invitation. And Keith, I just love the work that you've been doing, but there's a lot more. Everybody in here seems to be on the same track of trying to simplify the plan that we have, and is get the government out of our life and out of the cause of medical care. We don't need the government to tell us how to practice medicine. But I also want to introduce my son, Robert. Robert is a family physician in Fort Worth, and he's come over to visit as well. But it is great to be here. I think we live in critical times in many ways. I find fault with our foreign policy. I find fault with the attack on civil liberties in this country. And I find fault with the fragility of our economic system. Even though the statistics are great and everybody's employed, I would suggest that there's some ingrained errors that we will have to pay for someday, and that can be summarized so easily. Debt. The debt is out of control. The spending is out of control, and that means government is out of control. And I think that's what you're talking about. You're talking about how do you get control of our lives and our practices and our businesses. We need to think about shrinking the size of government. Most people, though, that work in or want to go to Washington talk about what they're going to do for you, which means how are we going to extract money or run up a debt and give you something for free. But the issue should be, very simply, how are we going to shrink the size and scope of government, and how are we going to enhance the cause of liberty? There's been a lot of people involved in this issue for many, many years, and it can be frustrating for some people. A lot of people have asked me, haven't been to Washington, and they'll come up and they'll say, well, you've been up there, you've been working hard, we know what you believe in, but really, what have you really done? Have you done anything at all? And then they'll say, wasn't it awfully frustrating to be in Washington and not being able to change things really in a real sense? I said, no, didn't bother me any. I said I had low expectations. And so going with low expectations, I'd like to think that's more being realistic. I feel that sometimes I got a little bit of a bigger edge than I ever dreamed of. Because when I started, I was very busy practicing OBGYN in Lake Jackson, Texas in the early 1970s. I was motivated by what was happening in a monetary system. A lot of people say, how did you get excited about this issue? And for me, it is the issue of liberty, but also it's closely connected to the very important issue of the monetary system. And I remember personally and very clearly a Sunday night when Nixon announced that he would close the gold window, print money at will, put on tariffs, and issued wage and price controls. Now, all those things, if you understand anything about Austrian economics, all those things are wrong. And I thought, and at the time, I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce. I went to a legislative meeting the next day on a Monday morning because Nixon announced this on a Sunday night. So I went to this legislative meeting, and the National Chamber of Commerce sent a notice out to each chapter on what position they would have on special legislation. And they came out gun-ho for this legislation. I thought, there's a disconnect. This doesn't sound like the market economy that I want to talk about. And yet that day, the day after Nixon made this major, and I think it's going to be one of the most significant monetary announcements ever, or at least in the last 100 years or so, to go off the gold standard. So, but that day, the stock market went up significantly, and it went up the highest had ever gone up in one day, percentage-wise, in the history of the Dow Jones. So it was seen as a very positive thing. And I thought, this country's in trouble. Keynesianism has gotten control. We need to reverse some of this. So at that particular time, there were 3 other Republican congressmen in Texas. And it was also, the first time I ran was 1974. It was a Watergate year. And so I said, well, I'm going to run. And Republicans were delighted. Anybody would run under these conditions, you know, must need their head examined, but we'll put your name down. So I ran with very low expectations, and lo and behold, there was a special election not too long after that, and I won that special election. So it was something that was not my goal. I wasn't going to say, you know, I want to be a congressman and I want to do this. How do I become a congressman? Matter of fact, that is sort of a little bit frustrating to me when young people come to me and they finally catch hold. We know the message. We like what you're saying. I want to be a congressman. I said, and they'll ask, what should I do? And I said, give up that as your goal. You shouldn't set your goal as being a congressman. Then you have to learn how to raise money, organize, and kowtow to this special interest and do all these things. I said, that is not it. What you need to do really is to understand the message. And if you understand the message, there'll be a role to play. And the place where I went back in those early years in the 70s and even in the 60s was I came across the Foundation for Economic Education, Leonard Read. And it was from there that I studied economics and became convinced that we were on the wrong track. And subsequently, being in politics, a lot more has happened than I ever thought would. Now, a lot of other people ask me about am I an optimist or a pessimist? Are things going to get better or are they going to get worse? What's medicine going to be like in a few years from now? My answer is that for the economy and our country and our liberty is similar to what I think about medicine. I think things will be all right someday, but not soon. But it's going to be all right because I happen to have confidence in people like you who do care about what's happening. And the groups that you're starting and organizing, you're practicing what you preach. Now, there was a well-known book written many years ago by a free market person by the name of Albert J. Nock. And he talked about Isaiah's job. Some of you probably have heard of this. You know, Isaiah's job was to count the remnant. Find out who the true believers are, because things are in chaos and we have to go out and find out where the remnant is. And that is the purpose of preserving something, preserving the truths that are important to us. So Isaiah went out and he says, this is not going to work very well because nobody's going to listen, nobody's going to care. And he says, God tells him, it's okay, somebody will listen. And if you preach the true message, somebody will come. You build a system or maintain these beliefs, and somebody will be looking for them again. And I think that is so true in a religious sense and also in a political sense. So I don't see that we're at the end stages of anything. And I always see that we're putting things together, we're holding them together. So this is the reason I see people like you coming together and operating in a very practical sense of not only being a remnant, but already rebuilding. I think the true remnant for liberty in the last 100 years probably goes to people like von Mises and Hayek and Hazlitt and these different people who wrote in the midst, at the peak of Nazism and fascism, and they were still preaching the gospel. But I think it's becoming more practical now. We didn't have a Mises Institute back then. We had the Fee Foundation, but now we have quite a few different groups. Now I see a group of people like you are actually in the reality of the practically changing things and how they will operate. So that is, I think that is something to be very hopeful for. But there has to be somebody who builds and describes the ideas, and if people hear about it, I believe they will come to that issue and they will use it. The preservation of liberty, of course, is a major task because it's been around for a long time, and another reason why I think things are going to get better is if you look at long time history. You know, the world is so young. It is really young. 4.5 billion years the earth has been around. How long have human beings ever given serious thought? The first book was written in about 5,000 years ago. First time people thought and wrote it down. But if you compare to what happened for the next 4,500 years, I mean, the last 200 years, there's been so much advancement in technology and describing how things have improved. But you know, my frustration with all that is the technological advances have been fantastic when you think of what we have. And the standard of living is much higher for a lot of people. And that, I think, is very good. The real frustration is so much of the technological advances have drifted into doing the wrong things. Just think of all the technology that has been used to fight wars. How much money has been used to fight wars? And as the other conditions, as we weaken our enthusiasm for liberty and we spend more of the fruits of the marketplace on wars, this just is diminished. I think what society needs is finally to concentrate more on how do we improve the conditions of the human beings getting along with each other. Because right now, you know, the technology is still advancing, but quite frankly, I think it's going in the wrong direction. I, for one, would like to take the issue of the amount of money we spend on warmongering and running our empire and grossly reduce that and turn that money back to the people so that we could improve the living standards of the people that have been injured by our bad economic policies. So this is something that can be done only by ideology changes. We have to change the ideology of people. Ideas are what makes the world run. And that, I think, we're advancing on that. The ideas of libertarian thinking and libertarian economics, the understanding of the gold standard, has all advanced. But when it comes to people getting along and allowing government to just grow on its own, it's out of control and it's deadly. So I think the burden is great on all of us to participate. I've often said to the many crowds that I've talked to that if you've come to discover that the issue of liberty is important and understand what liberty is all about, that you have a greater obligation to spread that message than if you're totally confused or apathetic. So a crowd like this knows something about it. You have an obligation to improve it for your own business and professional life, but it's also an obligation on our part to try to spread this message, because ultimately it's what the people, the prevailing attitude of the people, really what determines what happens in Washington. It's not the politicians in Washington. They are. This is why I was never frustrated, because I thought they were totally out of it and didn't know what was going on. But they were reflecting the people's attitudes and the viewpoints. The one example of this was in the 1960s, because I remember well, the Cold War was hot and heavy, and there was a crisis in Cuba, and I was still in my residency. I was in internal medicine at the time. I was in my second year of residency, and I got a draft notice. So I was drafted and ended up being in the military, in the Air Force for 5 years. But that was an absolute disaster. If you look at the statistic, millions of people died. It's 60,000 Americans died, and so many injured. And nobody would quit until The people woke up and said enough is enough and demonstrated on the streets and said no more of this Vietnam War. And finally, they woke up the politicians, and that's one thing they said: we will never leave. We've never lost a war. I remember Johnson telling them, we've never lost a war, and we're not going to lose a war under his presidency. Well, we did lose the war. We have to admit it. It wasn't because we didn't have good generals. We lost because they were fighting for their homeland, and we were interfering, and we were, enhancing our empire. So we lost that war. Think of the difference between the war that we did not win in Korea. That war was started when I was in high school. And we still have a tense situation. Hopefully our president is going to improve that. But it's a tense situation between North and South, and there's nuclear weapons involved, and they generally don't get along with each other, even though I think they would like to, but we prevent that. But what happened in Vietnam? We got kicked out. We weren't there. We didn't divide it in half. We got kicked out. And just think about how much was won in peace and lost in war. This is the reason that war is a drag. It's a financial drag. It's a drag on our civil liberties. And it serves no useful purpose unless it's an honest-to-goodness defensive war. Because I'm not a pacifist, but I'm also not a empire builder that believe that we have the obligation to be involved in the elections around the world, participate in the coups and various things. And we're involved constantly like that. So we'll need a change, and I think the change that we need has to be a generalized change in the sense that, what is liberty all about? What were the founders talking about? And it's not like this is brand new. To me, the positive thing is a libertarian message. And the libertarian message is based on nonviolence, non-aggression. And well, when did that start? Back in the 1970s, the libertarians had, organized their party. No, it started a long time before that. All you have to do is read the Ten Commandments. I think there's a bit of non-aggression in the Ten Commandments, and also even before that, the rules were written. It was very well known, very early in history, and that's 5,000 years ago, that you shouldn't kill people, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't cheat, steal, or kill, and yet it's been known for a long time. So this is not a new message, but there's the ups and downs, and yet we still have the frailty of some individuals who refuse to accept the notion that a person is born with inalienable rights and they deserve these rights, and that means they should be left alone as long as they do no harm. And under those conditions, I think you have a chance for peace and prosperity. So this is a message that is not complicated. I mean, and the founders understood this pretty well, so it's not like we're inventing something new. Non-aggression is not something new. I think some of the great leaders preached nonviolent civil disobedience. I happen to believe in that, even though I'm not so sure I'm brave enough to do that every time I'm unhappy with the government. But nonviolent civil disobedience is a good tool that can be used to call attention. But people aren't going to change unless they think it's in their best interest. And the best interest, of course, could be, well, you're going to have a better living, and that is true. But, I think that my personal opinion of this is that if we have a major crisis and wealth is wiped out and we have to start all over again, I still wouldn't worry too much about it if we maintain individual liberty and the right to go back to work and the right to our own life and the rejection of violence. I think the liquidation of the debt that will eventually come with the Jubilee is going to be wiped out. But the sooner that happens, the more complete it is, the better it is. But that one element of liberty has to be protected, to allow people to do what they think is best for themselves and to reject the notion of violence. So that is, available to many people. I would think that the insignificance at times of individual man or us as a group, it seems to be overwhelming. And yet the ideas are so powerful. When we look at the size of the cosmos, we are really a small drop in a big bucket. The Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. Oh, that's a long time. But mankind's only been around for about 5,000 years. And the insignificance of us, or to me, the significance of it is, there's an unbelievable number. They claim, they keep changing it, but they estimate there could be 100 billion suns, stars in the Milky Way. 100 billion stars. How many planets might be out there? How many galaxies are there? 100 billion galaxies. So when you think about us, we're pretty small, and yet I think we're dealing with a big issue. It's the recording and the practicing of this issue that I think in a spiritual way is very, very important. But too often we get directed toward the materialistic aspect. I think the free market, in a way, was a double-edged sword, because free markets produce tremendous wealth, and it encouraged the politicians to want to distribute it. And they've been getting away with that for a long time, until the point is that we forgot about talking about protection of individual liberty. And what we talk about and what we deal with is we deal with the redistribution of wealth. And that's why in Washington, believe me, I had very few individuals come and lobbying for liberty, but a lot of them coming for handouts. And that, to me, was very discouraging. I met some medical students here today. I was delighted that we saw some students here. But I have a little sad story to tell that I was disappointed with in Washington, because in my early years, there would be medical students sort of sent up by their medical schools, and sometimes resident, and they would come in, and they were going in groups, and they'd get an appointment with the congressman, and they'd come in. And I thought, oh, we're going to be talking about the philosophy of medicine. But they came in as lobbyists for some type of government group and more funding for this. And I just thought, holy man, is this what they're, teaching them in medical school, how to lobby Washington for more controls? They need to know more about liberty. Now, I don't advocate, my goal hasn't been to advocate free market medicine. But I am advocating free markets and liberty for everybody, which includes free markets for medicine. So it's a big difference. Some people would come up many times over the years, because I was known for taking a position which was, I thought, controversial enough that I would never be reelected. I thought the war on drugs was totally insane. I still do. And the war on drugs was an issue that I thought would, just never get me reelected. But lo and behold, it never hurt me. And now we're coming around. Some people want to legalize drugs for the wrong reason. Some people just want to make money, and some people want to use them. But I'll tell you what, if you can get rid of the war on drugs, it's sort of like eliminating prohibition. Saw an article this week, because I've always been curious, because right now everybody's concentrated on the opioid addiction and the need to do something about that. I thought, well, yeah, we should. Now, I was trying to think this through. I thought, well, I wonder what the statistics are on deaths from alcohol versus opioids. And I figured it must be 10 times greater from the opioids than from the alcohol. But this recent article claimed that not too much research has been done on it, said there was a significant more deaths when you add up all the deaths from alcohol. But what did we try? With the prohibition of alcohol? It was a total disaster. And that doesn't make alcohol a good thing or anything else, but it's the whole principle of liberty and how you solve problems. Right now, we have deferred, I think, too often to the government, and too often it's the federal government. One thing annoying, and especially this affects medicine, is deferring to the knowledgeable authorities in government to take care of our children, that we give them enough inoculations and do exactly as we're supposed to. And if not, the children will be taken away. I think inoculations are very questionable. But the principle there is who makes these decisions. Should it be some bureaucrat in Washington or some other place? Why can't they make their own decisions about this? But there will be some people make mistakes, but it's the idea of liberty and assuming responsibility. And we don't have enough conviction about saying what we need is more liberty, there's not enough people right now willing to assume responsibility for oneself. And that is always a problem. Because when it comes to civil liberties, I think it just gives, to me, I get so enthusiastic about, the whole country's diverse, too many groups, too many people fighting. If you ever want to think about bringing people together, why shouldn't that be liberty? As long as people get to make their own choices with liberty. That should bring people together. So liberals and conservatives, if you have a different lifestyle, religious beliefs, or anything else, if you know what liberty is all about, everybody should be arguing for this case. But our problem is the authoritarians have the upper hand because they don't believe in liberty. They believe that most people are stupid and they wouldn't know how to get medical care if the government didn't give it to them. And they have this moral responsibility to be the judge and jury and know how to distribute medicine. And so they approach that. And yet I do believe that people would be brought together much more so if the government just stayed out of it and understood what civil liberty is all about. The big problem there is people think, and I was accused of this over the years because I said, I don't like the drug war. Oh, you're just pro-drug. You want to give drugs to kids, and all that talk. And, of course, it was all demagoguing, but eventually practicality and education has changed the attitudes. Just think it wasn't that many years ago. If a teenager was caught smoking a marijuana cigarette, he could end up in prison with a significant term. And we have hundreds, if not thousands of people in prison still today that did not commit a violent crime because somebody thought, well, they shouldn't be doing this. So it's a big issue for people to understand how freedom works and why an individual has to be responsible. So this assumption that we have to take care of the people, take care of the children, and take care of the economy and make sure nobody falls through the crack, we have to regulate and always protecting somebody. We apply this same ridiculous notion to world empire. We have an empire. We have to admit it. And that's what Venezuela is all about. Who's going to control Venezuelan oil? That's what Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, that's what it's all about. It's control. And up until now, we have been pretty much in control. Yesterday, many libertarians were a bit annoyed, which included me, about what's happening to Assange. He's I call him a journalist from Australia that published materials that told the truth about what we were doing. And half the people in this country would like to electrocute him, and the other half believe that he's heroic, just as Daniel Ellsberg was. Just think, if Daniel Ellsberg had not done that, we wouldn't have the accepted historical knowledge that whole war was started by lies. And lies led us into Iraq. So this is what happens all the time, is they have to get the people on their side, and they will tell lies. But Venezuela is a real mess. There's plenty of lies told there. You talk about interference in elections. Who interfered in the 2016 election the most? Well, I have my opinion. I don't know the answer. I think both sides did. I just happen to believe that Democrats did a lot more than Republicans. But I don't even think that's the issue. Compared to what? Compare it to what the United States does, and it's not the United States of a true America. How often have we been involved in coups and takeovers and wars? It's just endless. And I think that's what the real tragedy is. Mainly because there's no rule of law in Washington. You know, we've given up. There's an imperial president. The president makes these declarations. Why can the president take us to war without a congressional approval? Why does the president have so much power with the executive orders? I believed in only one type of executive order, and that is to repeal some of those other executive orders. And that's, I think, what would have helped. So we have executive orders. How about on sanctions and trade control? Think of the power. Trillions and trillions of dollars are involved by manipulating, trade laws. It's all done by a single person. And the Constitution is very clear. Only the Congress can do that. But what about the unconstitutionality on money issue? I started by talking about August 15th, going off the gold standard. I mean, this is massive. This doesn't deal with millions and billions of dollars, not even a few trillion, many, many trillions of dollars. And it's biased toward the system, the monetary system, answers Ray Dalio's, inquiry about the wealthy getting wealthier and the poor getting poorer. So that's why we have to tax the wealthy more and redistribute the money and put more into public education and all that nonsense. So this is, it can be understood if you understand money. Because when the federal government runs up debt, the debt goes, to the most part, to the Federal Reserve, and they just print it up. And if that's distributed to Wall Street, to the banks, and there's mergers and higher salaries, and it doesn't go to the people. So the statistics are real. But Dalio never mentioned once the Federal Reserve. He says, we need to declare a national emergency. I'll tell you what, we may need to declare a national emergency, but not the kind that we hear about, because national emergency these days means more control of the American people. When they want to crack down, they're usually cracking down on the American people and the liberties of the people. And that certainly has been the case since 9/11. You take, for instance, on 9/11, of course, I was in Congress at the time, that within days, the Patriot Act was on the floor. I said, how did you guys get this together so fast? Oh, we've had this sitting around for 3 years. We've been waiting for an opportunity. I mean, that was, this is good. We need it. And they thought that they were doing wonderful things and they were being shrewd by so yes, they attacked the enemy, but it turns out that we were the enemies, and that is why a precise definition of liberty and where our liberties come from, that it is a natural right to our life, that we have control of our life, and we should have control not only of our life, but we should have total control of the fruits of our labor. But when we make the assumption and never raise any question that the government owns everything we earn, well, no, that's not true. Yes, it is. With an income tax, the government says we own everything, and we'll tell you how much you can keep. And if you go through a lot of paperwork, there are two things that I think indicate our government and the system believes that government owns us. One is the income tax. They will distribute our income and control it. The other one is the military draft. Why do we have a military draft? Especially now we don't need it. But they want you to know that if we need you, we have you, and they've used kids in the past. So that, to me, is an indication that there is no self-ownership and no personal liberty. So this is a mess, but I think it goes back to people believing and understanding what liberty is, and the understanding that people might not use their liberty properly. Oh my goodness, they won't do what we tell them. Will they drink too much or smoke too much or have other vices? Well, vices aren't supposed to be criminalized. Vices are bad habits. But now vices and language, political correctness, using pronouns, these have become crimes. Way too much power. We must deny them the money, and I would make a suggestion. This might be a little bit too radical for you, but to get back to the proper size of government, I would say that why don't we start with getting rid of about 80% of the federal government? That's what I think. I do want to mention, I haven't watched my time, so somebody wave a flag. If I have to quit, I'll watch Keith, and he'll wave a flag at me. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these problems I'm talking about. The income tax, the Federal Reserve, and the foreign policy all started in the progressive area, the beginning of the 19th century. But medicine was affected in the 20th century, in 1910. I'm sure most of you have heard about it, but to me, it was very, very significant and a warning of things to come, and that's the Flexner Report. You know, there were a lot of medical schools, and there were black medical schools, women medical schools, way too many, they said, and some of them aren't doing the job right. So they didn't indicate, well, why don't we work on improving the medical schools or have some program of education? No, we must close them down. So they had the Flexner Report, and you know, there were some major trust funds that were identified as very progressive lefty, and it was the government, and I hate to say it, but organized medicine, yeah, they're involved too. AMA, they were involved to cut out the competition. Freedom means competition. That's what you're talking about. If you want to improve medicine, which you're working on, you gotta have competition. That's why Obama's mandates were the worst part of that bill. And you're moving in the right direction. Get prepared and get right up to the edge and do what you can, but you need competition. Now, Rand worked on this. He got the presidency here, and they were able to lighten up a little bit because there were a lot of people that couldn't contract. You know, they couldn't negotiate. But now these groups are coming together, and I know there's some of those groups represented here. As an economic issue, if you could band together and negotiate, but you gotta have choices. This whole thing that Obama did, taking away, you know, the choice in insurance, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But the insurance industry is certainly guilty of a lot. And the Republicans are not exactly innocent on this. The piece of legislation that I had to stay up the longest to wait and see what the outcome would be was the prescription drug program. And I think a Texan was president at that particular time. So it was controversial, and the vote was close. The vote was tied. No, they were losing. Then it was tied. The vote started at 10 o'clock. It finished at 3. And there was a little bit of arm twisting. I think there were 7 broken arms that night. But no, they had to have that vote. And they finally did. But who were the lobbyists? Who were the lobbyists that come up there? Drug companies, insurance companies, some medical groups and organized management groups. They all wanted this, but it was all for profits and to get rid of competition. So that is the problem. You have to have competition. No matter what we talk about, whether it's the medical or education or money, we ought to always have the protection of being allowed to opt out. When you can't opt out and just go on your own, that we're in for trouble. And that was the reason Obamacare was such a failure and continues to be, because although Trump did respond and improve a little bit, what you want is to be able to walk away because you're not going to be able to turn the key and close down Obamacare tomorrow as much as it deserves. That'll happen with the bankruptcy of the country, and they just won't be able to provide the care. But in the meantime, the options should be there. In education, we have options. We still have a homeschooling in private schools, even though the states are still encroaching. One day they want to control, they want to test the kids, make sure they're being treated right. And then also in monetary policy, you have a movement on that I talk a lot about, is let something else happen other than the total monopoly of the money supply, the control of the money. The legal tender laws. Why do they have to have legal tender laws to make us use it? Because people wouldn't use it if you weren't forced to use depreciating currency that they purposely depreciate. And who suffers the most on that? Poor people in the middle class. But it's really crazy. But that's one thing in the short term that any participant in legislation is we have to say, look, I have a right to take care of myself, and it should be honored. And I think this door is slightly open. There's a crack there, but the door is going to swing open soon, because I believe our economic system is going to come down. I believe our empire is going to end, and there will have to be some major changes. And the reason I come to groups like this is I know that you believe in liberty. And you have to have some friends, and you have to reach your friends. And if you're seen as, well, if I get this thing passed, I think I can increase my salary or my wages by 50% or something, which is true. It might even be better than it. But it has to be for the bigger issue of the protection of liberty. And then, I've often said that I would give up, all my wealth if I retain my liberty and everybody retain our liberty, because I think we'd recover rather quickly. But we don't even have to do that. And it just gets disappointing that more people don't cherish their liberty as they should. And I think that should be the goal. I admire the efforts that you're making and the challenges that you have. I think you have to fight every battle and do your very best. And I think more people are listening out there. When Isaiah was told that, don't get discouraged, because Isaiah says nobody's coming, nobody's listening. But no, I'll tell you what, you take what Keith is doing with his hospital. They will know. And biblically it was said that if you tell the story and provide the information, people will come to that. And I think people will come to you, especially when we're in a crisis. So build it, argue the case, and participating in other individuals. That's why I was delighted that I met some medical students today that weren't like the medical students that came and lobbied me for more government in my early years. So my answer is not complicated. It's very simple. It's based on a God-given right for all of us, and it really does answer all the questions that you have to answer. And you can deal with licensing and vaccinations and all these things. You can have the answer. So it is not complex. People just have to have enough confidence to believe that liberty is the issue, and I believe we'll come out all right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Can you let us pepper you with questions for a little bit?
We'll give it a try.
I wrote down the first half so I wouldn't forget everything. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Paul, for the time you spent in Congress. While in Congress, all you did was look out for people, everyday people. Your votes were based on whether or not the freedom of individuals would be helped or harmed. You weren't seeking political power. Imagine that. A politician that had genuine concern for the American voter. So while you didn't get much applause for your speeches in Congress, your message of personal accountability still resonates with everyday people. And I think the growth of the Free Market Medical Association proves that people are looking for value. They're looking for the opportunity to make decisions based on what's good for them. Just the way doctors and other hospital staff and clinics are looking for ways to help treat the people and the patient without any entanglements, without any obstacles, without any opaque billing statements, without any walls or mysteries. Your message of personal accountability and freedom is proof as to why the Free Market Medical Association is growing. So thank you for your time in Congress.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And make sure you ask him really hard questions. He's a doctor, and he doesn't hold back.
See, if you ask me a hard medical question, I'll say, call your congressman.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Paul. I'm a medical student here from the University of Wisconsin. hopefully becoming one of those medical students who doesn't lobby for more government intervention. I found it interesting that you talked a lot about, like the end result you see coming with the eventual destruction of most of the federal government. But in the shorter term, what steps do you think, for example, the Trump administration or Congress could take to actually improve the situation we're currently seeing?
Well, the most important thing is to do whatever he can to allow competition. So there will be a limit on that. But there's also, the use of the executive order, which is, if done carefully, can be constitutional. And that is by removing things that have been done. So whatever he can do to, allow a competition, make it easier to buy insurance, take the position, say on insurance, and it might be just a description of how to interpret law, and that is the Interstate Commerce Clause was designed to promote interstate commerce. It wasn't intended to be given to one individual to write laws to inhibit interstate commerce. So the whole issue of insurance should be, if he took a strong position like that, I think that would help, the insurance industry, improve their policies. And the other thing is these mandates on who has to get covered. That is really bad. But overall, the tinkering like this is helpful. We should always move in that direction. But it's also a monster of an issue on how bad Obamacare is right now. And then the demagogues really can go after the politician because, oh, you don't care about sick kids, that sort of thing.
Dr. Paul, what do you think about the tax exemption for employer-based health insurance? Do you think that that's something that should be eliminated? And if so, how would you go about doing it?
Yeah, eliminate it. Because I think that's been one of the problems. You don't buy car insurance, through your employer. So I think that was a gimmick because of the tax code. You'd have to change the tax code. It was an advantage to the businessman, and it was an advantage to the labor unions, and they said, well, we're going to be getting benefits for this. So as long as it's tied there, but I think it would help. It would help to deal with the preconditions too, because insurance policies have been done in the past. You take insurance early on. Life insurance is that way, has been that way anyway. You give it to a young person, even a teenager, that a good insurance company should promise that they will, keep you on and have that in the contract, that you don't drop them. So I think you would have more of that individuality rather than getting the tax code mixed up, and then the special interests of the businessman as well as the laborer getting a benefit.
Dr. Paul, thank you again for coming to this meeting. I wondered if you would recommend 3 books. That's hard. 3 books that anyone in the room who is interested in making their understanding of liberty more profound, maybe from beginning to intermediate to more difficult, what would you recommend?
Well, there are so many choices that I can't really cover that very well. But one book that I've recommended over the years, because if somebody's looking to get started, it's so easy to read and so beneficial, and that's Bastiat's The Law. And that message there is very simple. It says that if you and I can't do it, government can't do it either. If you can't steal, the government can't steal. And my famous bumper sticker I had in my office the whole time I was there, don't steal. The government hates competition. So no. No, I think the law is important. I think Murray Rothbard's book helped me be converted and a true believer in Austrian economics. He had a book, America's Great Depression, explaining, because I had been raised in a Republican family where it was always Democrats and Republicans, a lot of what goes on now. But he explains, it was all policy, it was all the Fed, and it was Republicans and Democrats, and Hoover messed things up, and Roosevelt made it a lot worse and prolonged it. So I thought that was the other one. And then the other one is, I don't know if I'm allowed, but you could read my Revolution book.
Right here.
Dr. Paul, first of all, I want to thank you for your voice in the area of personal liberty and the voice that you have expounded across our communities and across our nation. We were invited to ask you the tough question, and so I've thought of a tough question to ask you. And it's posing it this way. When I write to my congressman and suggest to them what we ought to have as a replacement for Obamacare and as a statement on the government's role in health care, can you give me a skeleton of what that would look like? Of course, I'd attribute the credits to you.
Well, I probably wouldn't spend a lot of time writing the letter. But just tell them you want just tell them you want your rights back to determine all your medical care, and you shouldn't have any government interference, and that's what you want. But the problem with it is that the government is determined to do it, but I think it's be hard to just write it, because it's the absence of government that we want. And that would solve all our problems if we could just get the government away from the notion that they have some responsibility for it. They don't have responsibilities to manufacture and tell you what cell phone to buy. I often think about, what if when the cell phones were coming out, I didn't say it too often because I was afraid they would do it. The government should take hold of it, because every kid should have them. We have to protect the kids. And the government's going to manage this one company, and they're going to make sure everybody has a cell phone. Can you imagine how great that cell phone would be and how much it would cost? So, and sometimes I use this analogy for medicine. We should be distributing medical care as we distribute cell phones.
Right there, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Paul. My name is Krish. I'm a med student from Stanford. I was wondering if I could ask a question about your position on antitrust law and its context within healthcare. So before antitrust legislation, the railroads, for instance, they were kind of having their way with the markets, and that's very similar to what we see today with health insurance and especially big provider networks. It's been demonstrated consistently that left to their own devices, they price fix, price gouge, and rather than bringing prices down as one might expect in rational economics, they kind of gouge the consumer. So how might you reconcile that with free market conditions?
Well, I don't believe in laws that deal with monopolies. You don't say you have to have a business so big and then you have to stop them. But if you really look into that issue, you find out that essentially every monopoly has to have government protection. So the government is not allowed. I guess in a way, Obamacare is monopolizing the way we take care of people, one way or another. And it's a monopoly for some of the insurance companies and the drug companies. So if you're concerned about the lack of free markets, it usually is the government protecting a market. And I personally have felt that more in looking at prices of drugs. That is so outlandish. So that has to be a form of a monopoly. But I think that the laws should be changed. I don't think, some of the things the government gives them the monopoly even on drugs. They'll finally get a generic drug that can come into the country, and they give one company the right to distribute it. And so often the complaint of monopolies, if you look closely, there's something the government's doing to give special privileges and special favors to some special friends.
Let's take one more question, and then we gotta go.
Wonderful. Hi, Dr. Paul. My name's Eric. I'm another liberty-minded med student over here. And earlier in the day, we talked about the issue of price transparency and an impediment to the free market with that. And one of the solutions offered was having more government intervention to force doctors to reveal their prices. I'm curious, from a libertarian perspective, how do we solve this problem perhaps without increasing the government's role in the healthcare sector.
Okay, I didn't hear the part about what the government was going to force them to do.
So the question was, we have heard some proposals to deal with lack of price transparency by a number of states, and even the federal government is looking at forcing them to do that. What would be the libertarian response to that? And if that's not the right way, what's something that
we don't
be
even
done?
have the right to ask the government. No, they shouldn't force anybody to do anything. You know, on medical care, I think that the market. I understand a few free market people in this room. If they have services, they advertise how much it's going to cost. I mean, that's what it should be done. And if they don't, the consumer should respond. Well, you don't list the prices like so and so does. So no, the government should not write a law about what the pricing should be and how it should be handled. You know, a lot of people now are just really, really enthusiastic about fixing the minimum wage. You have to be sympathetic. I mean, you can't live on $8 an hour. So you have to move it up 15. Why not 20? Oh, well, you say that they'll move it up to 20. But the whole thing is that the control of this has to be government authority to push people to do this. So if one thing that I remember very clearly. That date that I gave you, August 15th of 71, on the wage and price controls, you know, just like that, actually, we became a socialist type of economy because we froze wages and prices just like that. And things just dried up. There were shortages immediately afterwards because of freezing of the prices and wages and my fees for the office. So they froze the wages. So I tell people who like to endorse the principle of fixing a price or fixing a wage, it may backfire on you, because back then it did. The laborers, the wage earner, he was frozen too. So if you have power to push it up or tell the patient tell the customer, the companies what to do, then you're also endorsing the principle, well, there might be a time that we'll just freeze the wages or lower the wages. Okay?
All right, would you join me in thanking Dr. Paul?
Thank you. Thanks a lot.